This is part 4 of chapters 21 and 22, the PowerPoint on Charles Darwin and on genomic variation. And we left off talking about the three broad observations that Darwin made: the unity of life, the diversity of life, and the match between organisms and their environment. And just a little bit more about the unity of life. Basically, this is what encompasses Darwin's perception of descent with modification. And it refers to the view that all organisms are related through descent from one ancestor that lived in the remote past. So in Darwin's view, the history of life is like a tree with branches representing life's diversity. You have the main branching point here, and then every diversification or speciation is occurring over time here. So this is the diversity of life. He reasoned that large morphologic gaps between related groups are explained by this branching process and past extinction events. So evolution, by definition then, is a progressive change in organisms over time, which includes a change in the gene pool. And the core principles of evolution are natural selection, which is a process in which individuals with certain inherited characteristics are going to leave more offspring than individuals with other characteristics because they survive due to whatever unique characteristics they have that gives them a better chance of survival. So in Darwin's view, the history of life, again, is like this tree that is actually diverging and branching because individuals are better able to survive than others. And this common descent with modification is the other core principle, that all organisms are related through descent from a common ancestor that lived in the very distant past. And over time, descendants of that common ancestor accumulate diverse modifications or adaptations that allow them to survive and reproduce in a specific habitat, which leads to this rich diversity of life that we see today. This is another depiction of that branching, so this is not specifically a tree, but what it shows here is the relatedness and the descent from a common ancestor. This is called a phylogenetic tree, and the plus signs, just so you know, are symbols for extinction. So Darwin noted that humans have taken on modifying other species by selecting and breeding individuals with desired traits. So this is a process that is now termed artificial selection as opposed to natural selection. So from here we can see in this picture the wild mustard, through selective breeding and getting desired traits, has led to all these different offshoots or descendants of the wild mustard. So from wild mustard we've got now kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, broccoli, and kohlrabi. Selective breeding works because the raw genetic material, the variation in the genes, is within an individual. And so within that individual, by selectively breeding those that have the traits that we want, you're able to produce the variety that we see. So within this pigeon is the raw genetic material for all the variety of birds that you see in this picture. This hidden variation is exposed through selection. So again, here's the descent from wolf, and what we get through selective breeding or artificial selection, the different variety of dogs that we know today. So Darwin came to his conclusions again from making very good observations. One of them is that members of a population vary in their inherited traits. So he has here this variation in population as observation one. You see this pictured here with a little bit of variation in color between all these different ladybugs, and also the difference in spots that's just due to variations in the expression of different genes. His second observation is that all species can produce more offspring than the environment can support. So many of these offspring are going to fail to survive and reproduce due to the lack of adequate resources for them. This overproduction of offspring leads to two inferences. So from our observations, we can make inferences. The first is that individuals whose inherited traits give them a higher probability of surviving and reproducing in a given environment are going to tend to live longer so that they have more offspring than other individuals. And then the next inference is the unequal ability of an individual to survive and then reproduce is going to lead to a buildup or accumulation of favorable traits in the population over several generations. So in summary, Darwin's ideas are that natural selection first starts with variation existing in populations. And we saw through chapter 21 that this variation is based in the genetic differences that exist and continue to arise. And that there is an overproduction of offspring. More offspring are produced than the environment can support, which leads to a competition for food, mates, nesting sites, an ability to escape predators. This competition sets up the population to have differential survival. Those with the most successful traits, which we term adaptations, are the ones more likely to survive, which then leads to differential reproduction, meaning that if you survive, then you live to be able to reproduce. So Lamarckian versus Darwinian's view. Lamarck looked at giraffes and concluded that by reaching higher vegetation, giraffes stretch their necks and then transmit that acquired long neck to their offspring, where Darwin thought instead that giraffes who are born with a longer neck are better able to survive and then reproduce, producing more offspring who inherit their long necks. So it's important to note that individuals do not evolve. Populations are what evolve over time. And this is a really important distinction and the difference between Lamarck and Darwin. Natural selection can only increase or decrease a trait that varies in a population. And the adaptations are going to vary according to the different environments in what is going to be favored or not favored. So now on to section 3. Evolution is supported by a lot of scientific evidence. There are continually new discoveries that fill the gaps identified by Darwin in his Origin of Species. And these new discoveries come about through 4 types of data. That we have direct observations, we have homology, we have the fossil record, and we have biogeography. And it's important that you remember that these are the ways that we are able to support Darwin's theory of natural selection. direct observations, for example,